Professor Vladeck, remind us of some of the details of these cases. First, Boumediene versus Bush. What are the facts?
Well, I mean, the facts, most of the individuals in these cases were picked up either on the battlefield in Afghanistan or elsewhere in Europe and North Africa, most of them between the fall of 2001 and I think late 2003 is when the bulk of the cases end. And these are cases where the detainees are challenging their ability to get into court, to have their claims pressed, to push the question of whether the evidence against them is sufficient to justify their detention as enemy combatants. And in the case of those detainees who weren't even picked up on what we might think of as a traditional battlefield, one of the questions is whether they can be held pursuant to this military process in the first place. Now, the answer may well be yes at the end of the day, but I think really the issue before the court today is whether the courts really do get to assert themselves in answering those questions, or whether they really should just defer to the political branches.
Richard Samp, we talked about Justice Kennedy being a key in this case. What kind of questions are you expecting from the justices to the two attorneys?
I suspect that Justice Kennedy is going to focus very specifically on the facts of this case. He's going to say, what kind of control does the United States have over Guantanamo Bay? And he is one who very rarely likes to admit that the federal courts don't have jurisdiction to decide a question. And so he's going to say, well, if you have brought these people to Guantanamo Bay, you are essentially implying that you will give them protection. And part of the protection that they ought to get is protection of the United States Constitution. And if he asks those kind of questions, that's a bad sign for the government.
Caller from Philadelphia, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi there.
My question is for Mr. Vladeck. I'm wondering, these enemy combatants, as he calls them, the battlefield, I don't think they had anything to do with the sheep, as the previous caller said. They were on the battlefield because they were fighting against us. Now, if Mr. Vladeck is so interested in getting them their jurisprudence, and I'm not a lawyer, would he be willing to have them stay at his house while they're waiting for their court case? And I'll wait for your reply. Thank you.
Stephen Vladeck.
Well, I mean, my apartment's pretty small, so I don't know that there's room for them. But I think, the bigger question here is, as the previous caller alluded to, at least some of the battlefield detainees, including one of the U.S. citizens held as an enemy combatant, Yasser Hamdi, were not actually captured by our military forces. They were captured by the Northern Alliance, by other militia bands in Afghanistan. And so I think it's entirely right, as the caller suggests, that individuals who are captured by American troops on the battlefield while engaged with our troops can be held as military detainees pursuant to the laws of war. The problem in this case is twofold. First, we're not actually treating those detainees pursuant to the laws of war. And second, there are a whole bunch of detainees, there's a large group of detainees who we didn't capture, or at least we didn't capture on the battlefield. And so I think, I take slight issue with the premise of the caller's question that every one of the detainees at Guantanamo is someone who one of our soldiers captured on the battlefield. If that were true, this would be a very, very different case.
Richard Samp, want to add anything to that?
I think Mr. Vladeck's correct that they are not necessarily caught by our troops. I don't think historically that has made any difference, whether the German saboteurs were actually captured by American troops or, as was really the case, they were captured by the FBI in various cities in the United States, doesn't make them any less enemy combatants.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right, although I think in the case of the saboteurs, they turned themselves into the FBI, they weren't captured. But the question is not whether they're captured, I mean, I guess to clarify my statement, not by American authorities, right, but by foreigners who have other reasons for capturing these individuals. It was true for a long time in the fall of 2001 that the United States was paying a bounty to individuals who turned over terrorism suspects to the American government. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but I'm saying that we can understand why someone who has a gripe with a local citizen in Anbar province might turn them over, not because they're fighting for Al-Qaeda against the United States, but simply because they don't like them. And so I guess the question is, should the government really be able to just point at them and say, yes, we believe you're an enemy combatant, or should the courts have at least some role in judging that after the fact?